Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO Jay Feitlinger and no-nonsense COO Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. All right, so here we are, Jay, with episode 10. Can you believe it? We're in double
Wow.
digits now. Like, we're all grown up. Revenue Rewired podcast hitting its stride. And the cool thing is we are getting questions and feedback, which we greatly appreciate. And one of the questions we've been asked is a little bit about how did we sort of end up in marketing, especially from my sort of peer group. They're very confused as to how I ended up in marketing based on my background. And then Jay, you have quite a diverse background as well, also being from sort of a sales history. And the cool thing is the season of graduation is upon us. And I think, a lot of candidates like knowing about the origin stories and how to maybe get into a deeper career in marketing. So let's dive in a little bit today. Um, Jay, I guess let's start with you and your crazy background and how you sort of ended up and what does it mean to be a marketer to you? Because you
Oh my
didn't
gosh.
choose this path from the get-go.
No, I don't know. My kids now, I'm pretty impressed with both of them that they kind of went into college knowing what they want to do when they grow up. I don't think I realized it until probably sophomore year at Arizona State. Go Devils. Um, but I think for me, I didn't really understand it until two key factors happened in my life. So I did graduate with a degree in marketing. And I did work for a couple, companies, both in the advertising side and for a large computer organization distributor in the marketing departments. And so I think, on the first part here, what was really eye-opening to me is I will never forget about a year into my marketing career at that computer company. I got pretty close with the head of sales. It was a very large organization. And, again, I shared this on a past episode, but he, made me realize that, my value isn't to help elevate, the various computer brands that we were supporting. My value was to create opportunities for his team. And I was like taken back by that, but it really opened my eyes to, my gosh, that really is my job. And then fast forward, after I launched my first company, in late 90s, I think it was, I was forced to have to understand how to do that. And I really got the value of all of that experience by understanding that my job was to really understand the customer and provide them the value to address their pain points. And I think a combination then of those two things is what made me realize that I was a marketer. I didn't
Mm.
really understand it until I had someone in sales tell me what my job was, and then me applying that to a business that I was financially responsible for. I think it gave me a very unique perspective, which is why when we launched StringCan, my gosh, 15 years ago, the since day one, it's all been about how do we help align the marketing and sales team, because it just kills me when I see those two departments who, in the day, are trying to accomplish the same goal of providing value to their ideal customer. When those two departments are, not aligned and pointing fingers, it just breaks my heart. And so I think if we can make a difference by helping take all of our marketing skills and teach that to be aligned, I think that'd be a huge value. But I think, again, people like you, again, I love having different perspectives because, again, I don't think you have to go to college to get a marketing degree to be a good marketer. And so maybe, Sarah, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your background? Because I know that when you first came on board, I know me and you had some interesting conversations around that.
Yeah, I loved talking about that in our last episode about the power duo, I think it was. But I've done a lot. Like I really struggled to pick something in college. I really liked a lot of things. I liked art and English, and I liked anatomy and physiology and science and language and philosophy. And I went to UW, go dogs, and go Huskies. And so they had a humanities degree, and I was a nighttime student. And so I'm like, okay, humanities, art, music, and literature. And my dad was like, what on earth are you doing with that? Like, what kind of career is humanities? And I really could never answer him. And I ended up in higher education, nonprofit, building code legislation, food packaging, and then here in marketing. And you know what it was the ability to unpack wherever I was. I got really good at understanding what the job was made for, I guess. And interestingly enough, now that I'm thinking about this in real time on the air here, I ended up doing marketing in a lot of my roles. Like even in the building code legislation job, I ended up creating a website and championing a sort of internal Wikipedia health driven website for that entire organization. And I worked with the marketing person who's actually the one that brought me on in the first place. And so coming here, I remember you and I interviewed, and at some point after I'd been hired, I needed to do something on Facebook. And I said, well, I don't have a Facebook page. And you were like, how did we hire you without a Facebook page? Like,
Was I
I
that
just
rude?
was, you legit were so surprised. Like, I don't think you'd ever met someone who didn't have a Facebook page. Like, it just wasn't a thing, 9 years ago or whatever. Everyone had a Facebook page. And I think like unintentionally coming into marketing gave me the freshest perspective possible because I wasn't trained to do any such thing a certain way. Like there was no maybe intellectual sunk cost bias.
Hmm.
So I wasn't ever taught the right or the wrong way to do things. And so you'd give me a problem and I could solve it in a way that was completely unencumbered by any possibility of doing this the wrong way. And I think I liked that about marketing because I liked understanding people and I liked making people better. And marketing just kind of naturally fits a little bit. It's a little bit softer than I think people can appreciate, but it has these hard edges that you have to give to it to sort of justify it, which is where I think marketing executives really struggle, is kind of like living in both worlds. I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
No, I completely agree. I think, the as we've grown the business and then helped, all of our current clients, I have found that it's very intriguing to me and of value to me when we bring someone in part of the conversation that wasn't, professionally trained as a marketer. I actually often find more value in people that have a different perspective. I mean, I've had conversations with CFOs and CTOs and just all the different roles out there. And I feel like a really good marketer is one that pulls in the data from all the available relevant sources and then understands, the human nature of here is this company you're trying to provide support for and you're going to be doing the marketing for them. And if you could truly understand the needs of their ideal customer, that's where I think we offer insane amount of value, which is why I just don't follow the, textbook marketing part because, when I was going through college, the sad part about it is I didn't really get a lot of real life, examples. I got, here's a formula. If you follow it, you'll win. But it was so heavily focused on like impression and reach and vanity metrics. And I did that for many, many years. And I always felt good. I'm like, wow, we increased the website traffic by, 184%. And then again, that sales, the head of sales from that one company I worked at would be always in the back of my head being like, who cares? And I just find myself being like, why does this matter? And if it's not generating conversation and revenue from a long-term, lifetime value of an ideal customer, I don't think we're doing our jobs correctly. And so that's where I think, from the marketing definition side, it gets really jaded depending upon where you came from, because it often causes a lot of struggle where most marketers do not think that their job is to help sales. And again, I have a lot of friends that are in marketing, and when we talk about it, they're like, I don't want to be like considered a car salesman. Like there's this negative connotation around sales. And I found that the minute I embraced the benefit of sales, because without sales, the company can't, in theory, grow. I That's when I think my eyes got wide open, or opened wider, once I saw it from that lens.
I almost wish that marketers and sales teams could do like a Freaky Friday where they could kind of switch for a day and live in the shoes of the other person. And I think that's maybe a little bit of why you're so thoughtful in your strategic placements of marketing tactics is because you've lived in the sales world that you're like, if I were on this person's sales team, if I were on this business's, executive sales leadership seat, this is how I would want to approach this from a marketing perspective. And I think that's something we're really trying to work on a lot is bridging the gap a lot more between sales and marketing and not just being friendly, but realizing you really need each other. And it has to be like on a seesaw. And if one isn't pulling their weight, the other one's falling, and so on. And I think, what would you say to a marketing executive who might not, who maybe accidentally came into this space or the role? How could they better understand sales and not hear it from usually sales approaches it like there's language that gets a little heated both ways, because they're so dependent upon each other and yet they act so independent. How could a marketing executive sort of step forward and meet that sales leader halfway?
I love that question. I think again, I got lucky that this all fell in my lap. One of my, like I mentioned before, one of my first jobs as a marketing manager, working with all these various different computer companies, is that sales leader told me that. And luckily, I was smart enough to know the value of having mentorship. And so, after he told me that, I really kind of thought about it. I met with my team and I really struggled with it a little bit because was like, wow, my whole world just got flip-flopped. Where because a lot of what I was doing wasn't in theory generating leads for the sales teams. It was doing a lot more of like the branding side of marketing. And so for me to understand sales, I asked for permission and they were very open to it where they let me join their meetings. And I just sat as a fly in the wall, for months on end, just sitting there and listening to them. And I found that was interesting. I often then would bring back to my marketing department, hey, here are things I heard. These are um, frustrations the sales team has. These are the questions or concerns they're hearing from prospective clients. All that stuff. And then our team then would sit back and be like, okay, well, based upon that problem, we could solve it by doing X, you know, making a collateral piece or creating a training, guide or whatever the situation might be. And it gave us this very unique perspective because before I did that, we just were making up what we believed would be good for marketing. And often it would be, a bunch of shiny object things that were super creative. And we were very, very proud of a lot of things that we did, everything from traditional marketing on events, even to digital back in the day. But when we were armed with these are the things that are needed to generate serious value, we all of a sudden now had a whole new purpose. And so I guess for me, luckily that happened early on in my career. And so since then, I've always looked at it from that lens of like, let me have the sales team help me do my job better because they're the ones that are talking to the customers, and they're hearing all the things, good, bad, and the ugly. And if our job could be reducing their stress and excuses and whatever the situation might be of why they can't close deals, we're going to be considered superstars. So that's what I think to answer your question. My advice would be is that if you're working in a larger company and it's hopefully a leader of sales, and you're the marketing leader, the easiest thing you can do to earn their trust is just to participate in their conversations with the communication of I want to hear these things so I can help direct our team to do a better job to support you to make your lives easier. And I don't know who would say no to that. And so I think if you could start from that perspective and then make it feel like the sales and marketing are one smarketing team, I think that's where I think the power could be, 10x. What are
Hmm.
your thoughts around that?
I agree with your approach. I think it's one way to go about it. The other way that I found to be a little bit unique lately, because it forces people, I think, to not be themselves, which is a good thing in this scenario. Like, if you were me, how would you approach this? How would you talk to yourself? How would you be different? And what's kind of cool is you get removed from the conversation, like anything about yourself, because it's them talking to themselves. Well, I would do, and they never, usually the answers that I get, they can't hesitate because they know exactly how they would do it. And you kind of hear something that you get a little unfiltered, because it's not them telling you what you should do. It's how they would do it. So automatically they're thinking that they can't judge me for this because this is my own perspective about myself. So there's this nice little unfiltered view you get when it's like, all right, Jay, since I'm in the marketing seat and string can right now, if I'm not doing what you need to be done in the biz dev world, well, if you were me, how would you talk to yourself? How would you help yourself figure this problem out? And I think that that would put you in a really interesting cycle of conversation. I don't know. That's worked in other aspects, but if I were to do that to you right now, would that be easy for you to answer?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I mean, I think asking smart questions like that, I think is always going to hopefully start up the conversation. Just the challenge that I've run into is if I was wearing only the sales director hat, I might need context regarding what you're trying to get to. Because again, from the sales side, my mind has always been trained. My job for this call or this meeting is to get the next step to be agreed upon before we hang up the call.
Hmm.
And so I'm thinking very like step one, step two, step three. And I'm often not asked to, unless I'm in a very, complex sales, which a lot of our clients are on the B2B side. I'm not always thinking about the bigger picture. So I love your question if it's framed up from a way of, look, I'm trying to understand X. So I'm going to ask you why. And then I'll get it's more of a blue sky, brainstorming discussion so we can just have a conversation because often when I'm in sales, I'm trying to think about hitting my numbers
Hmm.
and I might not be capturing some of the data. So again, that's where I think, the challenge I've seen happen on the marketing side is when I see marketing leaders joining the sales organization to learn, the sales team I think worries sometimes they're going to be asked to have do more work. And so again, marketing team members are notorious for being like, okay, for me to do a better job, I need data. So I need you to go on there and, validate the attribution of the marketing source and what questions they asked and lead scoring and all the things. So I can do a better job with that. And I often on the sales side, I find that frustrating. So the reason why I made that comment to you just now is if you ask that kind of question to get me to answer it, I just want some more context so I'm not going down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I think it would need to have a problem that would be wanting to be solved, like a complaint from sales, for example, on either quality. It's usually quality or quantity. I mean, I'm not going to try to oversimplify, but I think that's typically two of the largest buckets. So if you're coming to me with a quality problem, I'd say, well, if you were me and you would need to solve this quality problem for yourself, how would you solve it? But I think, an exercise that I would suspect would be so beneficial, like from a bonding experience on so many levels, would be secret shopping together. If
Hmm.
sales and marketing went out into the world physically and secret shopped, and then did their own experience because they would view it from two completely separate lenses. So it'd almost be great to take like three competitors. You each take one individually and then you do one together and then really decompress on like what was your experience? Like what did you notice? What was important to you? Because it shows you gaps, just like you and I being guests on other people's podcasts, we can see gaps in our own process. And I think it would be really cool to be aligned with that because then you're aligned toward the ultimate goal, which is potentially where the biggest opportunity for sales and marketing to align is they aren't so focused on the customer or the hero in the situation that they've kind of lost sight and they're really just trying to make sure that their own departments are sustainable and successful and that they're happy in their roles and they've got all the right things and resources. But it's kind of like, let's dial it back and look at it from our hero's perspective through the lens of secret shopping and what in our process can we work together to make better.
I love that. I think to take it one step higher, as you were talking just now, I started thinking about it a little bit. And I'm like, it just sounds so simple. Like, just do those things. But I'm like, why isn't it working? And when I'm reflecting a little bit about some of the past companies that we're considering or they're considering working with us, I am noticing there's this weird, I don't want to say toxic, but there's this weird feeling where the culture of the organization is like, stay in your lane.
Hmm.
And so I think I want to make sure it's clear for those that are listening to this that I think step number one, before you jumping in all these great ideas, like secret shopping and marketing team joining sales and vice versa, and having really healthy conversation. If the leadership team isn't leading by example by creating a culture of this unified front of working together where we're all heading to the same true north that we're trying to solve X, Y, and Z. It could be everything from revenue, reducing attrition, whatever the situation might be. If you don't have that figured out first, then I think you're going to get, unfortunately, no matter how good your intentions are, I think you're going to get pushback because, again, like sadly, I was thinking about it, about a year ago, we had this kind of chat with clients about the secret shopping idea that I love that you just mentioned. And they were like, we don't have time for that. We have to do, X number of cold calls or meetings or whatever the metrics were. And there was no kind of a long-term thought around, gosh, if we just take this time together to bond and learn from each other, we'll help each other do better. And long term, we'll have much faster scale and growth. And so if there's this constant fear in the back of their heads of like, I might actually get in trouble for doing these strategic things, if the culture is not embracing that, no matter what we try to do here, it's not going to work. So I want to make sure that that is clear. I know that that wasn't the intention of this show, but it got me thinking that if you don't look in the mirror and solve that issue first, then I think a lot of what we're talking about here are going to be like really challenging to kind of figure out the opportunities of how to work better together.
Yeah, you're right. Like we've talked about making sure that marketing has a seat at the table because ultimately, if sales and marketing don't have seats at the table, you're already biasing your organization toward the success of that one department that's being represented. That's just unfair representation. How can you expect your executive team to work together if you're not even showing the importance of both of those departments equally? So, from a culture perspective, it's a really fascinating approach because it trickles down into so much. If you're misaligned at the top, it's just like having a tire slightly unbalanced. It creates over time more and more and more problems that, and then ultimately the entire vehicle is at risk of falling apart.
I love that. I think to your point, so back to earlier on when I had you talk a little bit about yourself, again, I reflect a little bit on the clients that we're finding that are performing the best. And it's like the sales and marketing feel like they're all one department, which is super cool to see. Those leadership members are embracing that and they aren't discounting the value that a CFO or a CTO or your case a COO offers value. I love when like the head of marketing or the head of sales not only asks but also respects the answers from other departments' viewpoints. Because again, I think from a like a CTO perspective on the security side, maybe, or like the CFO from the profitability side, if you're all not aligned on trying to learn from each other to bring on more of the right kind of clients that are not only going to deliver you, great reviews and ambassadors of your brand, but most importantly, profitability. And so that's why I think, when you join the team, I've always really appreciated your point of view because you often think about things very differently than how my brain works. And I find that, the 1 plus 1 is far greater than two in that scenario. So, again, I wouldn't squash people because our title isn't tied to marketing or maybe tied to sales. You know, People that have an understanding of who you should work with and not work with, I think should have a voice. And again, I think it goes back into the culture sides. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
And I would almost suggest that it ties into a little bit of an extreme ownership perspective, borrowing from Jocko Willink here. But one of the things that surprised me about you was when you were bridging the world between sales and like client services a while ago, you were really gung ho on ensuring that those relationships that you had built so strongly in the biz dev process carried through to service. And I think it's why you were so involved is you really wanted to make sure that those relationships were being cultivated and cared for because that's what you did. And I think if marketers could also take that perspective and kind of flip the script and say, I really want sales to take the relationships that I'm building on the marketing side and take care of those, they would automatically feel more supportive of whatever it was that sales needed versus, feeling like, oh, it's never enough. And why aren't you doing this? Because really, ultimately, that's probably where the frustration is stemming from in marketing executives' worlds if sales isn't closing the leads or they're complaining about whatever, it's are you taking care of the relationships as strongly as I am? And both are very human centric roles. They both care a lot. So it's almost like if they just approached it from we care about this prospect so much and we know we can help them in our organization. Let's take that relationship to the next level together and make sure that they're ultimately being serviced through the end, which I think is where you and I really tag teamed well, was that I also took your perspective and your philosophy of taking those relationships and making sure through services and operations, even through the entire life cycle of being here at our organization, for example, that they were being treated the best way that we could possibly do to make sure that the beginning matched the entire experience.
Yeah, I think but where you offered me a lot of value from that side, like passing the baton, is not that I'm a control freak. I know I had been in the past. Stop that. Just stop it right now. But it's just not scalable. And
Mm.
so I think it's like, how can you provide the best experience possible as you're passing baton? Again, it ties back into the whole like, is everyone heading to the same true north from a culture point of view? Because it's almost like, if you go to a really high-end hotel, you're going to expect that when you pull in, everything from, the valet to through housekeeping, is just going to be a very consistent approach. And if one kink in that, armor isn't aligned, it just leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth. And unfortunately, in the world of consumers, we often will remember the one negative versus the 99 positives. And so I think to your point there, that was a hard part for me to understand. Obviously, we're a smaller organization, so it was in theory possible, but it's not scalable or realistic. And so then how do you make sure that you're hiring and training and onboarding team members that also embrace those values and cherish relationships? And I think again that's where I think, the two of three departments in an organization that are most customer facing is marketing, sales, and then obviously the customer service side. And if those three departments aren't in sync around their values and their personality and all the things, that baton is definitely going to fall, and you're gonna lose some strides there.
Mm.
And so that's why I think it was really helpful for me with your operational mind when we had this conversation. My gosh, probably maybe 7 years or so ago. Since then, we've worked really hard on me stopping realizing it has to be coming from me and more about leading by example and us bringing on people that are smarter and also cherish the relationships. And it's just so fun for me to see that baton moving from department to department. Because again, unfortunately, in the agency world, we're well known for, the A team is going to sell, and then they're going to be handed off to maybe team B if they're lucky, but probably team C. And I've had too many companies I've worked with over the years, being that I've been in this industry now for, my gosh, 25 years. That's one of the of clients' biggest pet peeves. And so again, here from a sales or customer service perspective, if you can really listen and understand that, you can help improve every touch point along the way.
I love that. What is it, is one of our closing questions, because I think it's so interesting to me that based upon your really diverse and thorough history in sales and marketing, what was it that brought you into strategy? Because that is such a good complement to, my role as an integrator on the operations side. And people ask us all the time, like, how is it that you guys work so well together? Knowing our lanes is one of them. Obviously, if you were more of a tactician, I wouldn't be here today. But what was it that really drew you into being more of a strategic marketer?
Wow. I think it probably started from the first business that I created. And so I'm trying to reflect on that for a second here. I think it is very different when you're the one writing the check. And so, I'm I don't like to say I was led by fear, but I'm sure that definitely was part of the incentive. But when I launched my first company, I'm very driven, and I refuse to fail. And so I got into it, and it wasn't a very large company that I started, and this was, gosh, I don't know, 25 or so years ago. I had a limited marketing budget. And so I found that the smaller the budget that was, the the more I had to spread that dollar. And I think that is where it really forced me to have to be comprehensive in doing the research. And so I'm like, okay, well, I know that I want to sell to people that want to buy my services. And this was a mobile pet grooming business, which was hysterical. And so obviously, you could just be like pet parents, but it's more than that because we were a higher price point, and we only serviced certain parts of the Phoenix area and whatnot. And so it just forced me to have to understand the ideal customer and then figure out where they were so I could find them. And there's a lot of noise even back then regarding how advertising and marketing worked. And so I think for me, the nature of having to, take that limited budget and making sure that every dollar mattered or counted, that forced me to have to be thinking strategically. And then what happened was we ended up doing so well with that, where we started actually consulting for other businesses like ours. We're like, my gosh, you guys are, 5 years ahead of us, and we just, and you just started. Like, what happened? And it really came down to us understanding our customer and making sure, no matter what, we were exceeding expectations, and always delivering upon our brand promise. And if we did it wrong, because we're human, we made up for it. And it really made a very positive impression where our customers now became our sales force. And so I just saw the power of if you do marketing right, and every department in your company, from sales and customer service and accounting, everything in between, if you all treat it from that level of respect, it really gives confidence to your customer that they picked the right company, to service whatever it is you're selling. In that case, grooming their dogs and cats. And so, from that just turned into me becoming a consultant. I'm like, ooh, if I can just apply that formula to this business, to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, and just keep learning better and better ways to be strategic around that. It applies pretty much across, agnostic to any industry. And that's really, I think, where it got exciting. So when we launched, this business 15 years ago, we did very well from day one because we just kept following the same formula. And then every year, with smarter people than me, like you and the rest of the team, we're just getting year after year more, smarter and smarter about how we do this to help our clients. Because a lot of our clients, their sales are very complex. I mean, we have one client that it takes 18 to 24 months to close one deal. That's a scary thing to say. And so we have to constantly be watching the pipeline and think about the tactics and the strategies that we're implementing to make sure that, every minute and every dollar counts.
It's funny because necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And that's kind of what you're saying happened. And actually, that's where I find myself in operations too, is I want to make sure that the team is healthy and we're doing the right things by the clients. And those two are often so at odds based upon all of the cool ideas that we have too. Like we're our own worst enemies sometimes and things happen. And so it's really like this tightrope that I enjoy walking because I care so much about both sides of the table. But I want to leave our listeners with one final question that I know they're dying to know. Of your mobile pet grooming business, which dog breed was the worst to groom?
Oh my gosh. Well, what's funny is again, as a business owner, if an employee calls out sick and you have customers relying on you, you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves, pun intended, I guess, to do the job. And so I actually had to get trained on how to be a groomer. And I, have done it numerous times. And, it's not very fun when it's 120 out and you're sitting basically in a sauna, which is what we basically did. But it's interesting on that. I would say probably the hardest dog was like a Great Dane type of dog, like a really big one. Because it was a
Mm-hmm.
physical thing. These things are massive and you have to move them from the bathtub to the grooming table and all the things. And, unfortunately, some of these dogs are pretty stubborn. But what's interesting is the second thing I would say is it's not a dog, it's usually a cat. I'm not sure if you ever seen a cat get bathed before or groomed. The noise, the shrilling that they make, it's I'm not going to do it out loud because it's really embarrassing,
I
but I
am
actually can do
getting
it
the
pretty well.
best visual right now of you grooming a Great Dane and a cat. It's
Yeah.
just, this is going to get me through the next tough time that I'm going to experience in my life. I know it.
On that note,
On that
wrap it up.
note, we always love questions. So if you would like any follow-up questions, please let us know. But we're happy to have this chat with you all. And thank you for listening to this episode of Revenue Rewired. We'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.